start with NATO summit? Are they going to make some commitments to Ukraine?
I have to think they're posturing and positioning. And here's the reason. The American media has not picked this up at all, and I think I know why. But Indian media, Indonesian media, and other media has picked it up. Three statements by Zelensky that make me think, and I hope, that sanity may finally prevail. The statements were, and you may have heard this, American press is busily trying to poo poo anything that hops up like this, but the Asian press is carrying it. Three statements by Zelensky. One, that he wishes another peace conference. Two, that Russia must be there. Not necessarily Putin, but Russia must be there. Three, no preconditions. And four, he might be open to Russia retaining control of that which it has gained through war, meaning Crimea and the Eastern Oblast and, whatever. I'm sure that that's all negotiable for Zelensky, as it is, I think, negotiable for Putin, perhaps not quite as far as Zelensky would go. But I can't believe that this is unreal or made up because the Asian press, particularly the Central Asian press, is carrying it. And if it has happened, then there's got to be a major movement on the part of Washington and its allies to squelch it. And I suspect that they may even be bringing some tremendous pressure on Zelensky, who for once, at least apparently, has shown some sanity and some concern for the people who are dying in Ukraine. So then this NATO thing seems like it might be a counter to that, particularly because Joe Biden is probably his staff. I don't even think Joe Biden is competent to do this anymore. But his staff has put it out because they can't possibly, they think, retreat from any position they've taken until the election, until it's over with, or until a more propitious moment arrives for doing it. A propitious moment being one in which they're ensured in their own minds that they will be returned to office, which I don't think is going to happen. I think it's going to get worse, not better. Notwithstanding a thunderbolt from Zeus, I don't think it's going to get better. I think it's just going to get worse. Now, that doesn't mean that Trump is getting better. He's not. So I think they're both shaving off votes by people who are turning to what you might call, hey, this is common sense that neither one of these guys is worth a damn. So what are we going to do? That's what people are saying. And many of the people I know in both parties are essentially saying, I'm not voting. I'm not going to the polls. I think this may be the lowest turnout in a presidential election we've had in years. And that's stunning, really, because we are in trouble. We're in deep trouble as a country, foreign policy wise, security policy wise, economic policy wise. We're in such debt. It's incredible. And no one's doing anything about it. So this is all coming together at a time that is not advantageous for us. Bad leadership, huge crises, both domestic and overseas. Gaza at the peak of that right now. Ukraine just below that, and we have no leadership. And we are having an election. Could you design a Hollywood recipe for more problems? And throw nuclear weapons into it and all the other things you and I have talked about in the past. And we're at a very dangerous point for the empire.
And Stoltenberg just recently said, yesterday in an interview, said that we are inviting Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea, Japan, because the problem right now is China. China is helping Russia. It seems that Russia is winning because of China, because China is, it's unbelievable how they're shifting their rhetoric right now toward China.
I think it's a fact of reality that people are beginning, especially some of my colleagues in the security community in places like South Korea and like Australia and like even New Zealand, and certainly Japan, are beginning to realize just how faltering the empire is. And the debates did something to add to that. The debates did that majorly because I've had people calling me from Tokyo, for example. What's wrong, Larry? Is he as bad as he looked in that debate? Because they're not happy about Trump's prospects of winning, but now they are almost looking at that being an inevitability. And the Japanese particularly didn't like Trump because Trump wasn't the typical Republican. The Japanese gravitate, the party that's been in power since World War II gravitates to Republicans naturally. They loved Ronald Reagan. And they do that because they feel like that's the party that will keep the security relationship sound and solid. Whereas the Democrats from time to time, Jimmy Carter in particular, when he thought about withdrawing from Korea, scared to be Jesus out of Tokyo. So they gravitate towards Republicans, but not now, and not Donald Trump. That's what he's done for the security relationship with Japan. So they're very worried right now. And that accentuates their fears of who is really now indisputably the hegemon in Northeast Asia. It's China. It's not the United States anymore. You know, the old theory of the Japanese and the Koreans and others too, from Jakarta all the way to Canberra and to Wellington, was that better to have a devil 4, 5, 6, 7,000 miles away than to have one right on top of you. So they looked at China, you know, both of us are devils, but we'd rather have the one far away than we would the one really, really close. Well, now the one really, really close is not only a huge component of all of their economies, but it's also the hegemon. There's no question about it anymore. Chinese power rules in that area of the world. And we can come in with carrier battle groups and carrier strike. We don't call them battle groups anymore. We call them surface action groups and other things like that. And we can act like we can do freedom of navigation operations. We can act like for a moment or two we're the hegemon. But as soon as we leave, it's like sticking your finger in the Pacific Ocean and withdrawing it. It just closes back over China. China is the real hegemon. China wants to threaten the Philippines. Anytime it wants to, it can. China wants to threaten anybody. But basically, I don't think China wants to. I think it does have some fishing problems. It does have real need. Much of its Ukraine, got Ukraine on the mind. Much of its protein comes from fish caught from the South China Sea. And in the southern part of China, that's particularly true. And they don't know how to replace that, even though they know they're fishing down the fishing stocks past the level where anyone who's an expert in fisheries will tell you they're going to get to the point where it's non-replenishable. And that's really alarming Vietnam and Indonesia and the Philippines and others in that region who also indirectly or directly depend on some of that protein. But China's the hegemon. Whatever China wants to do, China is going to do. And the more power they get and the more they realize that themselves, probably just like the United States of America, the more arrogant they're going to become and the more they're going to use their muscle to push their way around in the South China Sea in particular. But increasingly with respect to Japan and Korea, and of course they don't like that at all. So they want to use us regardless of how insane we are, especially the other direction, towards Europe and towards the Middle East. They want to use us to kind of deflect some of that. I'm sorry, Japan. I'm sorry, South Korea. This is the end of the American empire, and it starts in the Pacific. And so you better start thinking for yourselves. You haven't done it for half a century. You need to start thinking for yourselves. Maybe America will stay with you while you do that, and you would like to think that that will happen. But the precipitous withdrawal of America from both Atlantic and Pacific responsibilities is upon us. $50.7 trillion in aggregate debt by 2034. Interest payments on that debt that will equal Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and the defense budget in one 12-month period. That's what you'll have to pay to prevent default on your debt. That's what we're looking at. That is retrenchment written in bold capital letters across the headlines of the New York Times if they weren't so stupid and so tuned into the government. So these are crucial times right now, and our allies are getting extremely worried, and the debates just put that worry in a current tense, a present tense. Never had so much attention from my friends in Japan and Korea. Is it really as bad as it looked?
Just seeing Joe Biden is so scary.
Yeah, it is. And if you're aware of, as you and I are, some of the security problems we're confronted with, it's double scary because you wonder. It's like you're sailing on a man of war across the Pacific, and you're going to meet the great navies of Russia and Japan, everybody else, or maybe you're sailing the other way, and you're going to meet the British and the French and the Spanish on the high seas, and there's no one at the tiller. Your ship is rudderless. That's scary. I'll tell you right now, I am not sanguine about the next 3 or 4 months at all. Domestically, I'm not sanguine about what's going to happen as we approach the election and as it occurs, and I'm not sanguine about what's going to happen afterwards. I'm worried, deeply worried.
Larry, when you look at Russia going to North Korea, right now China in Belarus, Chinese army is in Belarus.
How about Putin hugging Modi?
Exactly. And did you hear what he said? He said the trade between Russia and India has increased more than 60%, and they're trying to deepen their relationship right now.
Yeah. I've seen the charts. It's astonishing what Russia has done to replace the United States in terms of a trade partner.
And what's the message, in your opinion, when you see the Chinese army is in Belarus and Russia is doing some sort of partnership, military partnership with North Korea?
I think Putin's trying to send a message that says, you've got NATO, look what I've got. And what I've got is growing, and what you've got is grown to the point of being unwieldy and being even dangerous for you. I'm worried about that, though, because I'm not quite sure. I have a lot of respect for Putin's ability to think strategically and clearly. But I'm worried that when you line yourself up with Kim Jong-un, who, according to my Korea friends, whom I became quite intimate with during the time we were meeting with Kang Sak-ju and Yi-gun and all the rest of the negotiators, they're all dead now. By God, I've been gone so long. But we were meeting with the creme de la creme of the North Korean bureaucracy. And there never was any talk whatsoever about, except maybe from time to time there'd be some ballyhoo, that Kim or someone would put out just to, electrify his own populace. Never really serious talk about reunifying the peninsula under Pyongyang's leadership. Always been a goal of the Kim dynasty, but never serious talk about doing it. There's serious talk now. There's serious talk, and the talk comes after a decision by Kim, which I think is a good interpretation of his latest remarks, that he's given up on the United States. Donald Trump was it. He's not going to talk to the United States or deal with the United States ever again. But he is going to reunify the peninsula. And then there's all this argument in the Korean expert community, English-speaking Korean expert community, in Canada, in the United States, and elsewhere, about what that means. Does it mean that he's going to try conventionally to reunify the peninsula and hold his nuclear weapons as a backdrop against us doing anything? I will nuke Seoul if you do anything. And I don't care. I don't care if your answer to me is Pyongyang will disappear because you'll put 100 nuclear warheads on Pyongyang, because Russia will put 100 back on you. That's the danger I see in this, either interpreting that way or Putin actually made some sort of agreement to that effect. Don't worry about Washington anymore. You said you've disconnected from them. You said you're never going to talk with them again. You said they're out of your diplomatic entourage ever again. I'll cover you. I'll cover you for whatever you want to do on the peninsula. I hope he hasn't said that. May have come close to it, but I hope he hasn't said that. I hope he hasn't given him the assurance that his nuclear warhead complex, which outnumbers ours, it's the biggest on the face of the earth, stands behind him. Because if that is true, then he has just negated us. He's checkmated us with regard to the peninsula. So that's what scares me about that relationship. And of course, it scares me about the relationship with India because, as I've said to you before, I think India is the kingmaker in the BRICS right now. I think which way India and to a certain extent Turkey go, which way they ultimately go, decides and seals the fate of the American empire. So they hold the American empire's existence beyond this year in their hands. And that's from an economic point of view and a power point of view. So this is a really crucial time right now for the empire to understand what it's done to itself and to begin to back off, which is almost impossible if you look at the history of empires for empires to do. What they do is they double down, they triple down. No matter how deep, profound their failure is, they put more in. It's like a gambler who's pulling that slot machine handle. All his credit cards are completely maxed out. He's sold his house. He's mortgaged everything he's got. He's put his children and his wife on hold somewhere, and he's still pulling the handle. You know, it's crazy what we're doing. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And we're going to lose everyone in our entourage eventually because they're going to wake up. They're going to wake up one day and they're going to say, those debates were not just Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Those debates were reflective of the state of the American empire. And that state does not give me warm feelings in my fuzzy pit of my stomach. I got to find some new ways to deal with the power in the world.
Right now, we know that Turkey is part of the SCO. The way that they're asking for BRICS, part of SCO, what would be the link with the West? Just NATO? And within NATO, they're saying that if NATO decides to fight Russia, we're not going to be part of that. China, not there.
I think they have now, if you consider the insanity of Washington right now, this might not make any difference to Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, and Joe Biden. But if they make some sort of move or even tacitly express that they're with the alliance of China and Russia or the BRICS or whatever, or just that they're neutral and will stand on the sidelines and hold their coats, economically especially hold their coats, we're dead. We're dead. I don't care how many countries are in NATO. We're dead. And look at the power. Look at the power in NATO. Montenegro, Albania, oh, what power. And the Baltic states. Oh, man, what power. I'm sorry. We haven't added anyone to NATO in the vast array of countries we have now who really has any power to speak of.
Right now, I don't know if you saw the Bild, a newspaper in Germany. It's a famous newspaper in Germany. And
yes,
it says that they're comparing, I don't know, today they were comparing, they were just putting out the images, the pictures from comparing NATO to Russia and China. And what's the necessity of having this type of discussions right now that we are at war, that we already have a war, a conflict in Ukraine? Why do we need to have a new conflict between Russia and China on one side and NATO on the other side? Who's going to benefit from that?
That's the question of the hour in the sense of you can't understand the insanity, but I can understand the insanity, I think. I know what's happening right now, I think. And I know it from my study of imperial history over the last 3,000 years, but particularly the last 1,000. And it's like someone wrote the script for us, Nima. In particular, the British Empire. It's like someone wrote that script. We had replaced the British, economically speaking, at the end of the 19th century. The British didn't wake up until 1956 in Suez. They went through a traumatic half century plus there. World War I stripped them bare of their manhood. It stripped them bare of their treasury. And it was all about balancing Russia and Germany and the empire's imperial interest in keeping things squared away with regard to, number one, Russia. And they thought everything had gone swimmingly for them when the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks and the rest broke out in revolution and took Russia out of the war. Au contraire, Stalin was worse than the previous Russian, the Tsar, and Britain still had its problems. World War One didn't solve anything, but it put an end to the British Empire. It put a resounding end to the British Empire. It wasn't the same after 1918. It just was not the same. It took World War II to prove that to them, and it took, the 56 Suez crisis to make them ashamed of themselves and to begin at least working to glide slope down to being out of the world's greatest empire, probably in history. The Persian, the Mongol, the Mughal, all the other empires in terms of acquisition and in terms of money didn't equal the British Empire. Not really. Maybe the Persians came close, but not in terms of breadth. The British adage about the sun never sets on the British Empire was a true one. They actually controlled places all over the globe. Well, they got too big for their britches, but they had the sense eventually to glide down and to become, as Jeremy Greenstock said to me one time on a radio show, we're a middling power now. And I said, Jeremy, you're more than a middling power. Now I'd probably say, yeah, you're a middling power. With guys like Rishi Sunak, you're a middling power. and you can't do anything but adhere to the special relationship to maintain any power at all. So how do you do that? How do you do what Britain did? I don't see us having the sense or the wisdom to do that. But we're going to have to, and we're going to have to do it, I'm afraid, catastrophically. And as I said before, people are beginning to awaken to that. Leaders all around the world are beginning to awaken to that. Europe is so much on the tit, so much on America's side, so much dependent on America, even though they have their own economies, they have their own power, that they don't want to break away. Powell and I had this conversation one time after we'd had the conversation about wait until Europe gets a body of leaders that weren't born in the war, that don't remember what the debt they owe to America, et cetera, et cetera. That has really not come that true that swiftly. But what has come true fairly swiftly is another conversation we had about the Europeans are too dependent on the United States. They have lost all ability to think on their own, especially in security terms. I think that one has come screechingly true. They are. And they better wake up pretty soon because they're going to be left in bed with no blanket and a nuclear weapons horror hovering over them, and a great power over here and a great power over here, China and Russia, and others lining up more or less with that axis, and nothing else but a Washington who's gone home. Gone home because physically, we cannot do anything else. And that's coming. That is coming. You cannot sustain $50 trillion of debt.
Larry, how do you see the Labour Party right now in the United Kingdom? We had some sort of hope that they would change something in their policy, in their domestic and their foreign policy, but it doesn't seem that would be the case right now. When it comes to Gaza, the party is totally dominated by Zionists right now. And when it comes to Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, they don't seem to have any sort of policy toward a political settlement.
I think what you're looking at is a phenomenon that, again, Colin Powell and I and Henry Kissinger and a number of George Kennan talked about in his office when he was Secretary of State. And that is that when Tony Blair made the decision to be with George W. Bush regardless, to even lie for him. And I'm not necessarily accusing him of lying for George W. Bush. I think Tony Blair was lying for himself, too. For example, when he said, in 45 minutes, Saddam Hussein could rain rockets down on London. Oh, come on, Mr. Prime Minister. Where did you get that lame one? And the MI6 and MI5 were all, oh, God, what did he say that for? That's not true. People accused him of being totally he had a decision to make: the special relationship or something else.